What is up, everybody? Welcome to another weekend roundup here on Touchline Talk. Before I jump in, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week. Two topics to cover today, going to keep this pretty brief. First, Arsenal dropping more points in the Premier League, dropping points at home against Brentford. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about what the Premier League has acknowledged basically as a missed call, or at least a series of incorrect events that were connected to Brentford's equalizer, because the reality is Arsenal got outplayed again. The reality is Brentford deserved that point, if not all three. That's the bigger takeaway here. Arsenal can feel hard done. I'm not going to spend time getting into that. You can go read about it, see what the controversy is if you're not aware already. But the reality is Brentford deserved that goal. Arsenal still 3 points up with a game in hand on Manchester City heading into Wednesday's showdown. But what this result did more than anything else, A, Arsenal still just not playing well, but B, it changes the complexion of Manchester City's trip to the Emirates on Wednesday. Because now they can go level on point. Now, Arsenal still have that game in hand, but if Manchester City go into the Emirates and win, you are talking about level on points with a game at the Etihad still to come. Even assuming Arsenal win that game in hand, that gap is now 6 points, which means this is back in Manchester City's control, at least to a large extent. You got the goal difference thing in there, of course, but the point being, if Manchester City win both head-to-head matchups, they can completely close this gap. That is really where the focus needs to be coming out of this game for Arsenal. They did play better, particularly in attack. They created chances. And games like that happen sometimes. I keep saying this and it feels cliche, but they still are having a phenomenal season. They were just on pace to have tied for the best season in the history of the Premier League, and this is not the best team in the history of the Premier League. So they've hit a little bit of a speed bump. They still got a point. This is still very much theirs to lose. They just need to take care of business at home against Manchester City. But it has opened up the door where Arsenal, from Manchester City's perspective, Arsenal have basically done their part at this point to give you this opportunity to make this a title race again. The question will be, does Manchester City do their part and take 6 points from these two games? Because if Arsenal win, now you're talking about a 6 point gap with a game in hand. And it's a very different conversation. So this just sets up a phenomenal situation for Wednesday when these two teams finally meet in the Premier League. The second thing I want to touch on for a couple minutes is what's happening with Canada Soccer, with the Canadian women's national team preparing for the She Believes Cup. And somehow, some way, both Canadian national teams have now found themselves on strike in the months leading up to a World Cup. I talked about the men's stuff when it happened, and now you have the women's team who is going to play in this World Cup, She Believes Cup, and then the World Cup, but play in this She Believes Cup coming up basically against their will is the way that they are framing this, that they are more or less being forced to play. You can read Canada Soccer statements, you can read the statements from the players, but that is the players' perspective on this. But they are going to play. And where I really want to focus this on is just kind of what needs to happen moving forward. Because it is incomprehensible that the men's and women's national teams from a federation of a country like Canada felt they had no choice but to go on strike leading up to some of the biggest games of their career. And in the case of the men's team, the biggest games of their career. Because none of them have done anything on the international level remotely close to a World Cup, right? On the women's side, you've got World Cup experience, you've got gold medals from the Olympics. They're a little bit more tested on the international level. But nobody heading into a World Cup is trying to go on strike. You can only view it as something that they viewed as the ultimate last resort. Because they clearly, I mean, obviously, they all care a great amount about the World Cup and know that this opportunity doesn't come around very often, and it may never come around for one of them again. There are no guarantees. Nobody wants to spend their preparation on strike fighting with their federation, which means you have to do an incredible amount of things wrong to get your players to actually feel like they need to go on strike. And the list of failures at this point from Canada Soccer, from the scheduling mishaps and all the stuff that went down with the men's team, to now you've got the women's team saying they were informed there's going to be cuts, they're not going to play home games leading up to the World Cup, all of this stuff. There's just an extensive list at this point. It's incredible how many times these players have been failed by their federation. And so I look at this and I say those bridges are burned. And one of the things that the women's players mentioned at the end of their sort of original statement about all this was, if our request can't be met, it might be time for new leadership. And there's no if about it or might about it for me. I don't see how you rebuild this trust. Go listen to the pain in Christine Sinclair's voice when she's talking about this. Go read how strongly the men's national team is in support of the women's national team. They are all unified on this against Canada Soccer. And like I said, you can go through the long list of all the ways that Canada Soccer, for one reason or another, has failed its players. Whether you think it's Canada Soccer's fault or not. There is no coming back from this. And so the best way for Canada Soccer to show it actually cares about its players and cares about making this right and respecting them the way they deserve is for the people in leadership to just raise their hands and say, we haven't done a good enough job. We've failed our players, and we need to do things differently, and we need to step down. That, at this point, is the best thing you can do for these players, because there is no reason to believe this is going to get any better, and we are, for the second time in, less than a year, talking about a furious Canadian national team at war with the Federation as they're supposed to be getting ready for a World Cup. There is just no reason this should be this difficult, and the amount of frustration, pain, and tension is remarkable when you read what these players are saying and how they're expressing their opinions and the feelings and thoughts they're having. And Canada Soccer has just not done a good job explaining its side of this story to the point where you can understand how it's gotten to this point, because it just doesn't make any sense. And the players clearly have not gotten the answers that they feel they have not gotten the answers they deserve, one way or another. Things happen sometimes, mistakes happen, but there hasn't been a lot of accountability. And so you can say all you want if you're Canada Soccer about how you support your women's team, about how you care, all this stuff. It's just empty words when these kind of situations keep coming. And the fact that now, the She Believes Cup is going to take place basically under protest, and the team feels like they're forced to play, that's not making anything better. It just continues to get worse. There is no sign of progress. And the longer this goes on, the farther you get from having any hope of rebuilding all this, which is why I come back to the point I made earlier, which is the point I'll end on, which is there is one way forward for Canada Soccer, and that is to just start from the beginning again, a new set of leadership, and try and do this better the next time, because this has turned into an absolute disaster time and time again. That is all for the weekend roundup. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. I'll see you next time.